Hello everyone, welcome back to Intellectual Combat. I'm Joe Archino. Right here with me is Mike Doody. We are very excited to introduce you to our premiere podcast. Before we really get into the show, we really want to explain a little bit about who we are and what this whole podcast is about. So Mike, I want to give the floor to you. Who are you? What are you all about?
Absolutely, my pleasure. And we're elated to start this podcast. Me and Joe have been working together on Westchester Talk Radio for quite some time. And we believe that branching out into this style and doing our own thing is truly where we're going to, make our money for us and get our voice out into the public around here like it needs to be. So a little bit about me. I'm an 8-year combat infantry veteran. I served time in Afghanistan with multiple deployments. Now I am a business owner of 2 gyms, and life has been chaotic and hectic at times, but it's awesome, and I'm super excited to start this podcast. Joe?
Yeah, Mike really said so much good stuff, and I got to meet Mike from covering This Is Why We Stand is my brand that I came up with. I started in sports broadcasting, but the thing that I've always had the greatest passion for is military history. So I like to tell people sports broadcasting gave me my voice, and I use that voice to kind of find a way, how can I connect with veterans? How can I share veteran stories? And for me, one of the things on this podcast I hope we can really bring to you is my wealth of knowledge of military history. But it's one thing to just tell you about the history. Mike and other people he's going to bring on have served in combat scenarios, have served in the military, so they can kind of give you that opening experience of what it's actually like. I can only tell you based on what I've studied. These guys have done the real thing, and they can really bring you a unique perspective. So I think this podcast is going to be really great. And Mike, before we bring in our first guest of the program, one of the things I'm really excited about too, which you and I have already got some people lined up, is while we are going to focus a lot on military stuff, the connection with the military and anything related to that, this is going to also be bigger than that.
Yes, so this is going to be much bigger than that. And I've been out for a little over 3 years now, and life has been moving fast and chaotic, like we've always discussed. However, this podcast, what we want to do is we really want to Joe brings a very versatile background to the table of military history. He really knows his stuff. Obviously, I experienced it. A lot of the guests we're going to bring on, and one today, have experienced it. But we're also conservatives, and being in New York and the surrounding area that we're in today, it's a very odd thing to meet an open conservative. But I like to call myself a modern conservative. I have a lot of libertarian viewpoints too. So this podcast is definitely going to stem along the lines of that, and a little bit of politics, but also a lot of my experience in the military, and then we're going to touch on tons of military history and try to make it as fun as possible and as informative as possible. And today, we actually have one of my old soldiers that was in a platoon with me for quite some time coming on. He's ex-infantryman, badass, Army sergeant, and I'm super, super pumped to have him on. His name is Dan Diedrich.
Well, you can't say it any better. For our first guest on the podcast, Dan Diedrich is joining us. And Dan, it's always a pleasure to meet new vets for me. I know Mike and you already have a connection. So I think first and foremost, can you tell us how long the two of you have known each other? When did you two meet?
Sure, yeah. Well, first off, thanks again for having me on the show. This is pretty cool. I've never done anything like this.
Our pleasure, buddy.
But yeah, where Mike and I first met, so my unit, the Bravo Company Black Sheep 187 Infantry Battalion with 10th Mountain Division, we deployed in 2010 to 2011. Redeployed in 2011, had minimal downtime, so we deployed again in 2013, and I believe, Mike, that's when you arrived to us right before that deployment, and then we deployed to the RC East in Afghanistan.
Wow.
Good old Band-Aid Sarday.
Now, Dan, let me ask you, Mike, I've had Mike on my other program, This Is Why We Stand, a lot of times, and kind of he's given us his story and his background of what led him to enter the service. What about
Sure.
you? What led you to serve?
Oh, man. Well, I would say to simplify it, I would say it's probably 2 things. One, I think that as children, specifically boys, when we're 5 to 6 years old, at our most impressionable age, I feel like it's literally impossible to see a man or a woman in uniform and not think, man, what is it they're doing? That looks so interesting. They look so brave, and
I'm with you
without question. But
so I think that's probably one of the things. I kind of grew up with that. That question in my mind: do I have what it takes to do that? The more obviously I grew up and learned more about what it is that soldiers and Marines and service members do. And I grew up without a father, so I didn't have someone to show me how to throw a left hook and turn wrenches and stuff like that. So I naturally always kind of had that curiosity. Do I have what it takes to stand next to the finest men and women that defend our country? And so that was one of them, one of the motivators. The other one I would say probably came from my profession at the time. I was in retail management. I was working for a shoe company, full service shoe store that I had actually just gotten my first promotion. I was a trainee. And then when I got my own store, I moved to a state where I didn't know was Seoul, Muncie, Indiana. If those of you who know, not a lot is happening around there. Ball State University, and that's about it. Maybe a couple of bars. But with that being said, I was working pretty much open to close, dark to dark. And, I didn't like the way the course of my life was going at 23. So, reverting back to my old curiosity, my childhood curiosity of, do I have what it takes? I have so much respect for men and women. I would love to be one of the elite to stand up for, our country. And I didn't like my situation. I wanted to get back to school, as I had dropped out of an architecture program prior to that. So in the end, when I made that decision to enlist, I had all the reason in the world to raising my right hand.
It's a fascinating way, and I think, that to me, that's what it's all about. As an American, we all have our struggles at times, and then we all have the ability to sometimes just pick it up and find our own path. And it sounds to me like that's what you really did there. Mike, kind of from you to build off of that. When you kind of went into the service, I believe from our experiences, sort of similar. You had an awakening like that where you kind of found, I think this is the path for me, right?
Yeah, without a doubt. I think it is instilled in you at a young age, though. And like Dan was saying, and I mentioned on other shows, that everyone grows up and they see people like John Cena and they look at him like a god.
Yeah.
But every little kid grows up playing these little army structural soldiers, these little toy soldiers. Every kid does, and there is a warrior deep down inside everyone. I think some people just have it a little more than others, but everyone joins the military for different reasons. I think me and Dan kind of joined for the same reason. At the time, we definitely wanted to serve and protect our nation, and obviously 9/11 was a trigger to that. It was a catalyst to us moving into what we did. But Dan, I had the honor to serve with you and deploy with you. I got a two-part question, man. What are three things that you believe you can take away from your time in service and apply to everyday life? And then how can a combat infantryman like yourself use these things to their advantage?
Yeah, well, if I had to narrow it down to three, because to be honest with you, Mike, learning from guys like you, and again, going back to not to stray away from the question, but when you go to the military, coming from a past like I have, I didn't have a father. There are so many big brother and father figures that you come across, especially in the infantry. And if I had to narrow it down to three, I would probably say overall work ethic. A lot of times before I joined the military, I would find myself really liking the idea of something so much to the point where I would start it, but then I wouldn't finish it. I would get distracted. Hey, let's go out, have a beer. There's just a million other things I'd rather do than this thing that I said I wanted to do. So work ethic, I think, is one of them. One of the things that First Sergeant Phillips, our first sergeant, our mutual first sergeant, in our first in our unit together at the time. One of the things that he said to me that always resonated, and still I can hear him saying it in the back of my mind right now, like he said it 2 seconds ago, is work the standard, not the clock. Standards and discipline. And it's one of the principles that I carried over to the restaurant that I recently managed. And, it was not always the most popular idea, but it was the right idea. Do what the task is to the standard, regardless of what time it is. I think it's a lesson that a lot of young people can learn and would greatly benefit from. And so I think a lot of fundamental skills and a lot of fundamental principles that young people should learn. That being an example.
So Dan, you're saying quality over time.
Yes. So going back to the three things that I think I took from the military, the failure not being an option mentality. When you have a soldier that's wounded and they need to get airlifted out of a hostile area, you don't think to yourself, well, what if we're not able to do this? What if the bad guy, they overwhelm us and we can't get out? You don't think like that. You think, what is it that I have to do? These are the things I have to do it. Now we execute, and that's it.
Dan, real quick.
Sure.
So I don't mean to interject, but you kind of just reminded me of something. Remember when we were on Andar and we were getting ready to push out? We were probably a week or 2 weeks away tops from getting pushed out, and the fuel point blew up.
I do remember that, and actually, at the time, I was not at Andar. We were at Bande Sarde.
You were still at Bande Sarde. So that's a perfect example, though. And I don't mean to cut you off, man, but it's exactly what you're talking about. And two of our soldiers were right next to the fuel point. The fuel point blew up. It's debatable whether it was still an actual insider attack or not, but the fuel point blew up, and it ended up burning one of our fuelers so bad. Two of our soldiers had to. Sorry, it's tough.
It's tough stuff, and I think that's one of the reasons why I think it's so important to do a podcast like this. And for me, for someone who hasn't served, one of the reasons it's so important for me to tell stories about military histories, I still think that the vast majority of people take it for granted every single day how lucky we are to live the lives that we do. For people like the two of you who were out there and served and saw the type of stuff that you did, I think every day people wake up and they just take it all for granted how lucky they are to have the lives they do. And I think a lot of times people need that reminder of what the world is like and what it takes to live the way that we do. I think regardless if you look at the Revolutionary War, the American Civil War, World War I, World War II, the current war on terror, there's stories that need to be told each and everywhere. Everyone who served has a story, like the two of you. And, that's why for me, someone who hasn't served, it's such a pleasure and an honor to have conversations with the guys like you. I learn so much every time.
And we'll move on with it, but it's funny. You see how, emotional you get at the smallest things. And there's nothing that gets emotional.
I get choked up every time I think about Maddox.
That was his name, and just Sergeant Maddox, and they pulled him out, two soldiers, and then we all ran down there and put him on whatever we had. I don't even think we had stretchers at the time. We put him on something, but we basically carried him and set up a Hayes DHLZ for a medevac bird to come in and take him away. But that was just that call to action that soldiers have. Everything was done to quality in First Sergeant Phillips' company, and everything really was done to quality, and it was proven on the battlefield that day. But Dan, I don't want to cut you off, man. So basically, 3 things you can take away. That was a huge number 1. Let's move on to 2 and 3 if you have them, and then how you can apply that to your advantage in everyday life.
Yeah. So I would say overall discipline is another big one. Like I said, I guess it kind of correlates to what I said before about working the standard and not the clock. It kind of goes hand in hand. But the discipline to do things to standard, the discipline to adhere to tight deadlines, timelines, knowing what you got to know, knowing it to standard, being able to teach it is one of the huge things in the Army where, you get to a point where you are looked at as a leader and you school yourself to become a leader. It's one of those things where you will continue to you'll develop dysfunction if you yourself are dysfunctional, if that makes sense. 100%. So I've always been a very big believer, once I accomplished the rank of sergeant, I've always been a huge believer of leading by example. I would never ask my soldiers to do something I myself couldn't do. I would never ask them to know things I didn't know. And I would try to be like their living example of what I expected of them. So discipline is for sure one of them.
Awesome. No, I think that really, pins the nail on the coffin, man. That was a great response.
Dan, just really interesting stuff. And like I said, I always learn so much from guys like you. But let's go to our third one now. And I asked Mike about this on one of the shows that he had. I think he brought up some really important points. He came up with the idea for the question. I thought it's really one worth exploring, and I want to see what your take is on it. So it seems like there's a lot of celebrities who are the current champions of thought in the common moral compass for many people in our society today. What do you think about celebrities being thought leaders and the guiders of principles today?
Well, I was thinking about this question because, as you might know, I've been studying a lot for exams. I'm a full-time student. But I was thinking about this question a lot right before you guys called. And what I've concluded is the motivator for a celebrity to become the champion of voice, that term cracks me up. It's for their own publicity. It very seldom does it have anything to do with, this is what I think America should be, this is what I think speaks best for the people, because they are not the common people. They are not the common man or woman that works a 9-to-5, has kids, lives paycheck to paycheck. That is nowhere near their realm. So for them to be thought of as champions of thought, whoever, in my opinion, again, in my humble opinion, whoever would look up to a celebrity and say, that's what I agree with, you guys are not living in the same world. So I think a lot of the time, if someone thinks of a celebrity as a thought leader or a champion of thought, I think what it is they really they're already a fan of, Jim Carrey or whoever, you know what I'm saying? They're already a fan of that person, and basically whatever that person says, they're going to worship it and they're going to follow it. And they don't take the time to educate themselves on what is best for them. How would you like America to be? What would you like? What would benefit you, and what would make your quality of living the best when it comes to government and politics? They don't take the time for themselves to figure out what those correct answers are, and therefore they turn in, my favorite Instagram model or my favorite whoever I follow on Facebook. That is who they follow. That's what they learn to, know as common knowledge for what is politically correct or incorrect. And I don't know. I guess that's my best answer to that.
That's great.
I don't think you could say it any better. And it really, what I think you said, and what it boils down to is, those people are so out of touch with the common American. The common American lives a certain way, and the people at the top like that, they can't get into that mindset, and it's very hard, I think, for times. And that's why, to me, it's just always, when you hear a lot of this stuff, it's just, they seem to me out of touch. That's the way I easily boil it down to.
Very simply said, yes.
That's a great response. And I had the same exact question a few months back from Joe on the Westchester Talk radio show. And it's funny you bring up Jim Carrey. I brought him up too. I had a list of, 8 to 10 celebrities that just did defaming, despicable acts at the time. And it just goes on and on. I mean, you see this
Kathy Griffin
downhill. They say that SHIT rolls downhill. Obviously it does. And it just keeps picking crap up as it goes. Kathy Griffin's another example. The severed head, I got that. Snoop Dogg in the music video. You have Jim Carrey painting defaming pictures of Sarah Huckabee Sanders, and I could name a dozen more, but it's definitely, in my mind, it's not worth it, man. I like to touch on it, but that's a great answer to the question. I mean, you couldn't have said it any better, like Joe was saying. Let's move on real fast, and this one is a little more, politically driven, but it's definitely closer to us militarily than anything else. So obviously we're still at war in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. It's tough to see an end, and now recently we've been at war in Syria and trying to create some kind of liberty and justice for the people in Syria and really just liberate them essentially. But President Trump has announced a drawdown and an eventual pullout of Syria to come relatively quickly. What are your thoughts, and do you think this is the right decision? What do you believe that we should be doing in Syria to ensure that ISIS is eradicated?
Well, let's start off with your first question. Do I think it was the right decision? To be honest with you, I don't know that I am the best person to ask if it's right or wrong. I don't follow it as closely as perhaps you guys do. But I do know that, I have a lot of personal experience that I can relate to a matter like this. And I know that radicals and ISIS and all those bad guys, they are raised from birth to hate. They're trained. They are brainwashed. They only learn one thing, and that is hate for anything that is not consistent with what they believe in. And we are the extreme to that. So I don't think it's ever going to go away. I really don't. I think that, President Trump saying that, we've declared victory over ISIS, I think it is a little bit ignorant.
Well, Dan, let me correct you real fast. I don't believe he necessarily claimed that we had a full victory against ISIS only in the cities that we overtook.
No, I understand that. But there's plenty of YouTube videos, Facebook, it's all over the internet, where he is declaring victory over ISIS. So whether or not the pullout has actually happened, I know that one of the most recent articles I looked at, there's still 2,000 troops in Syria. So again, like you said, gradual. But I think it's a mistake. I think that, I think back to a lot of the times when I was in a small village in Afghanistan, and my unit pulled out and said, we're going to retrograde this cop or fob, and, updates on the area months after. And, it was flourishing with Taliban. It was flourishing with ISIS and insurgents. So I think we can expect that in the future if that is, in fact, what's happening. And I to be honest with you, I dread it. I think the next time we turn on whatever our trusted news network is, and we see, the black covered faces, and we see that flag, it's going to be on a much bigger magnitude, unfortunately. That's what I think.
Well, dude, that's a great answer, man. What do you think would be the number one thing that we could do or that we should be doing to eradicate ISIS if we were to stay?
Oh, man. What do I think we could do? Honestly, I think just not pulling out, maintaining a certain presence, a certain military presence in Syria or those other countries, but just not a complete pullout, I would say. It would be my simplest answer.
No, it's great, man. And I love that answer, and I agree. I touched on it yesterday, actually. But, if you look at wars in the past, and most of these countries that we've had wars in, now we have bases in. We had a presence there, we went to war there, and now we still have a presence there. Most of the countries, there are a few that were small scale conflicts that we don't, but the majority and the heavy majority we still do. You think of the Germanys and Japans and Italy and so many of these countries that we have bases in. It's astounding. It really is. And what do we do in the Middle East, man? Are we going to be in Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria for the rest of the dawn of time? Are these countries really going to be liberated? Can radical Islamic terrorism and Islam taught the way it is in the East, could that ever translate to a westernized society? We don't know, but I think that's a great answer, and it's definitely something we'll dive more into in
Absolutely. Well,
shows.
If there's one thing we certainly know from studying history, it's that there's certain things in the world that don't change, and that is an area of the world that has always been conflict. It's a very complicated part of the world, and the problems there aren't going away anytime soon, so it's always something we're going to have more to get into. But the thing for me that I really think is important, though, is you two come at this position from an important position of credibility. You've served on the ground there. You've seen the problems firsthand there from a military standpoint, from a cultural standpoint. So you really know what it's kind of like to talk about that. And, I think when we look at the rise of ISIS, now obviously ISIS has got their last stronghold, which is really in its final days. But I think if people just expect their days to be numbered and they're going to go away and fold up, you haven't been watching the news very recently or following events, you always have to be so vigilant. And I think that's why the point you guys are really trying to hit home is you need some kind of a presence, so when this threat does come back or there is any sign of life coming back, you're there to stop it then and there. Is that a safe
100%.
thing to say?
You know, it's hard because it's 2019. It's not 1980 anymore. The innovation in weaponry and machinery has evolved so much that there's so much out there that wasn't there in the past. I mean, just IEDs are an example. Just command wire IEDs, how they come up with it, and just closing the circuit on angel hair wire is brilliant in its own way. But these people weren't educated, you know, at some small scale Afghani or whatever school. I mean, you have people who legitimately went to Harvard, who went to Yale, who have Ivy League degrees, who go back to these countries, and then they're the engineers for these people. And not only that, but just like what Dan was saying, they're trained from a young age, and I was touching on this a little while back as well. You see 4, 5, 6, 7-year-olds that are literally trained how to shoot to kill. I mean, this isn't a joke. This isn't a lie. And Dan could attest to this.
They're taught the same basic rifle marksmanship, with maybe not to the same standard, with an AK-47 that our recruits are taught in basic training.
Right. And, you know, they also use their women and children as shields and kind of weapons against us because they know that we're not going to cause that type of collateral damage. And it's just, you know, it's sad. It's heartbreaking to see that stuff, and it's tough. It puts us in a very vulnerable situation. And one that I do think is going to be years to come, like Dan was saying too. Is there any right answer? Probably not. Dan, I know I want to move into a more informal kind of like sit down, just BS back and forth. But real quick, you know, Rand Paul was on the news the other day, and he was talking about how he is in favor of the drawdown. And kind of the incentive that he was talking about was that we would save billions of dollars, you know, if not trillions, because we do spend a lot over there. And he also wanted to give $2,500 bonuses to every veteran who has fought in those foreign conflicts or wars, specifically Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria. Now, I was saying that I wholeheartedly could care less about any type of $2,500 bonus that he's giving me, and he's not looking at the second and third order effects and ramifications of that decision. But also, you know, on a broader scale, and I don't mean to get off topic, but on a broader scale, you know, who is really making the decisions? Is this going to be voted on in Congress? People who, some have, but the majority have no idea what the heck goes on over there or haven't served their country for a day, and they're going to be making the decisions. I understand that it's more civilian ran on the decision side of the House, but I don't really think that's the right call, and I don't think there should be a bill to be voted on like that. I think that's just insipid and crazy to me.
No, 100%. First off, $2,500 bonus. This is all news to me, by the way. Would do absolutely nothing to motivate me to make the choice to do that or not to do that, to go over there and, you know, make sure that, you know, everything's being sustained, you know, everything that we've done over there, you know, winning hearts and minds, as we used to put it. But as far as who makes these decisions, to be honest with you, I don't think anyone that hasn't had this kind of experience should be involved in a decision like that. Sure.
Agreed, man. So anyway, let's move into this informal sit down, and we'll be relatively quick with it. Our time is coming down. But you're in school now, man. You know, I'm a huge advocate for veterans to use their GI Bill, surround themselves with success seekers, goal-oriented, like-minded people. And me and you have been talking for like the past 3 weeks to a month now, every Monday or one day during the week. And the other day, I think it was last Sunday, we talked for like an hour and a half, not even knowing it. And it's just great to have that kind of, you know, collaboration and thought process bouncing off each other. And, you know, what you're doing now, Dan got out and he was going on a business venture, and then he kind of cycled back to going to school. You know, what you're doing now is definitely the start of a greater future for you. And, you know, I've definitely been honored to kind of be a you know, rope in that plan and something you can hold on to for advice. You know, tell us a little bit about that, man. How's school going, and what are the future plans, 3 to 5 year goals?
Yeah, no, first off, Mike, don't be modest. You know, you've been a mentor to me. Second off, yeah, so when it comes to school and all that stuff, I was, when I got out originally, I had aspirations to be an entrepreneur. I wanted to open up a small chain of restaurants with my cousin, who actually was already pretty successful in that kind of industry. It failed for various reasons I won't get into, but that's where I guess my kind of what are my contingency plans? What are all the things that I have available to me as a veteran? And this is one of the things Mike and I were talking about over the course of the past 3 weeks to a month, is that honestly, not just veterans, but in some cases, especially veterans, where they victimize themselves. And we like, your I want to say your second question, how many virtues do you think you pulled from the military, and what do they do for you? Being resourceful. Okay. So when I got out, I had, this injury, that injury, I have all this experience. And now, with the Soldier for Life program, the military forces you. It actually forces you. You literally cannot sign out of an installation without doing these classes that set you up for success. All too often when I was sitting in these classes, I noticed soldiers, putting their head down. They don't even bring a pen. They don't bring I was bringing a laptop. I was taking notes. I was asking for business cards. And I was staying after class to talk to the instructor about what more I can do to further myself, to make sure that I'm set up for success when I leave, because there's nothing I can do about it afterwards. So getting myself involved into school, taking advantage of the benefits that I have with the GI Bill, it's been huge for me. Right now I'm on the path. I'm just taking general studies at a community college nearby, but I'm probably going to end up selecting psychology as a major, because I myself, and this is kind of a touchy subject, I have post-traumatic stress disorder, and it has caused a lot of adversity in my life, especially in my marriage. But one of the things that's really important is to learn how to live with that. And because you can't just, a lot of the times what happens is, soldiers live in the past. They wallow in their pity for themselves. And I deal with this, man, I could have done this over there, or I lost my buddy, it's all my fault, or whatever the situation it is. You have to learn to live with it, and you have to move forward. You have to learn to move forward, and you have to know how to utilize the resources that you have at your fingertips, because as soldiers, as veterans, we have so many that we could utilize to move on from those things that seemed like they kept us stuck in a rut, in a black hole. And currently that is what I'm working on.
No, I love that, man. They use it to pin them down. And I think that part of the reason that you're going to be in a very small, because there's so many, but part of the reason why you're going to be successful is that warrior mentality. And I just see it in so many infantry dudes, but especially you. And I know that we have that connection because of that. And it's never going to pin you down, man, regardless of, crap that we bring out of the military with us. There's always going to be a way, and you're always going to find a way around that. You will be successful. There's no questions asked, man. It's literally those three things that I tell you over and over and over: success seekers, goal-oriented, like-minded. That's all I did. Yeah. And that's all I'll continue to do, man. And really, that's who you should be surrounding yourself around and enveloping yourself with. You are the sum of the 5 people that you hang out with the most. And that can be true with 2, 3, 4. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be 5. But you are the sum of that, man. And you have tons of success in the future. I know it for a fact.
Appreciate that.
I wish you the best of luck, Dan. I mean, I think for me, I certainly come to this from a different standpoint from you guys. You guys have that bond, that unbreakable bond from serving together. And, to me, it's a learning opportunity just as much as it is just me trying to do whatever I can to give back to guys like you. If I could use my communication skills and anything to help share stories with other people, that's it for me. But to me, I think I've learned so much from Mike and now from you, and I continue to learn. So I thank you for your time and for giving us so much good stuff today.
Thank you, Joe. It was a pleasure to be on this show and to share all of that with you guys. And, I would like to do this again if you guys are.
Absolutely.
Oh, I think we'll have some time for you in the future again, my friend. That's for sure.
Yeah,
Great.
You will definitely be coming back on, man. Thank you for your time, dude. Get back to studying.
Dan, we wish you all the best. Thank you. Well, that was Dan, and we can't thank Dan enough for coming on today. Mike, I mean, you talk about a first guest for a podcast, hit it out of the park. That was just fantastic.
Absolutely unreal. He's a great guy. I've mentioned before, and yesterday we were talking, that you learn some of the best lessons and just things you can really take a piece of the pie from off of the youngest people. He wasn't necessarily the youngest person, but he was a subordinate to me in the military, so to speak, and I learned so much from him and so many people. And just like I was saying, you take a piece of the pie from everyone, and he has such a warrior mentality that he's done just that. And his experience level has expanded so much faster than other people because he will sit down and listen. And he has the humility to do so. And he's got a very bright and successful future ahead of him.
No question about it. You guys talked about the whole program. It's that warrior mentality. When you have it, you can overcome anything. Now, Mike, we're winding down our first podcast, but I mean, it's been a lot of fun so far. You got some things you want to help take us out with. What do you got?
So, what we're going to do here on the podcast, and it's going to be very informal, we're going to do, personally, I'm going to do things I like, things I hate. I just want to do things I like today. Let's end
positivity.
On a bright note.
I like
Positivity always trumps negativity. Pun intended. So, a thing I like, and, this guy will probably be listening in, and I try to tell him straightforward and shoot him as it is. We vacation in Wildwood. We started this tradition this past year. And we vacationed down there in Wildwood Crest. And I met this kid who when I first saw him, he had a USMC shirt on. And I was thinking in my head, is this kid a Marine? Does he have family that were Marines? And he had a disability. And I didn't know at first. He looked like he was 17, no more than 17, 18 years old. And I didn't know, was this a combat injury? It didn't look like one. So it ended up that this kid has cerebral palsy. So he comes up to me one day. We're on the deck. I met his parents, and he came up to me, and he knew I was a vet, and we hit it off right away. And long story short, he got into how he has been trying for years to speak with recruiters, and he really just wants to get in the military. The Marines is his top choice. He's tried the Army. They've turned him down. And you do not meet, I'm sitting there and I said, this is such a shame because you don't meet people who are in the best shape in the world and, fully worthy from a physical standpoint of serving our nation, but you don't meet people like that at all. Especially in the area we are in and in today's society. And here's a kid who comes up to me with one of the biggest patriotic, warrior-minded mentalities that I've ever seen in my life, and he can't join because of this pre-existing condition. And, I sat down and I talked to this kid for about 2 hours, and one of the hardest things to speak with him about was how, I don't know if he ever will be able to get in. And I pray to God that someday we can make some kind of waiverable situation, or he can do some kind of job that necessarily isn't front lines infantry kicking down doors action, or maybe with technological advances he can. But one of the hardest things I actually had to tell this kid, and I was like, you know what, buddy, I'm gonna shoot you straight. Let's sit down and relax. I had a cold one. He's underage, and let's talk and let's really solidify this. And I had to tell him that, listen, the military, regardless of who you are, has rules on the table, and pre-existing conditions is one of them. So I couldn't come in the military with any type of communicable disease, which would be HIV. I can't come in the military with any type of paralyzed situation or cerebral palsy or anything like that, because it's a pre-existing condition, and the government is going to have to foot the bill. Whereas if you're in and you get injured, you get that bill. Essentially, they've invested in you, so they will take that one surgery on their books. So that's kind of the difference. And I had to tell him this, and I had to explain it to him. Listen, I don't think it's ever going to happen, buddy, and because of X, Y, and Z, what I laid out. And that was tough. But you know what? I felt like no one was being honest with this kid. And I had a significant choice that day. I could have beat around the bush and not told him the truth. And I wanted to tell him the truth. Until this day, he FaceTimes me probably every other month or every few months. And he recently FaceTimed me with a situation that, or a scenario rather, that he is going to get surgery on one of his hands to help fix it and give him more mobility. And he's been talking to a recruiter who is at least going to submit the paperwork to see if he can have a waiver or there's some kind of way he can get into the service in some capacity. And I just thought that it's such a motivational story. I hope to be able to drive down. He lives in Central Jersey and meet up with him one day. Young kid, going to college, wants to graduate first, which is a phenomenal idea. And you do not meet people like that at all who just want to serve something greater than themselves.
It's a fascinating thing, and it sounds like such a great kid. And I'm really glad, you took the time to spend and be a mentor. Because if there's one thing you could tell from our interview with Dan, from other people we've met, you do have that ability and just that pull, and that's what great leaders do. People gravitate towards you. They look up to you for your wisdom, for your advice, and certainly for him, he's found somebody like that in you. So I'm sure that means a lot. And it's one of those things too where I'm reminded of one of my favorite quotes from George Washington.
Here it is.
If you read if you follow my work, I like George Washington a little bit. But one of his quotes was, "Any post in which a man can serve his country is honorable." Sure. And I truly believe that. Serving on the front lines, kicking down doors, like he said. It's just not all of us are built to do that, but there's other ways we can serve our country. I think the Hacksaw Ridge movie about Desmond Doss was phenomenal about that. It taught people that you don't always have to carry a weapon to serve your country. I think he was the ultimate example of that. He went into combat with everybody else, saw all those terrible things, but his religious convictions, he just would not do that. And he saved... Exactly. It's. I think there's so many ways and different capacities to serve. And it's just going out there and finding it. And I'm sure with you giving him advice, and he's in school right now, I'm sure one of these days we'll have to bring him on the program too.
Oh, but no question.
But it's awesome. Stuff like that is what this country's all about. It's, overcoming the adversity and owning it.
But you know what? And I kind of want to lead you into what you're doing too. It's people like you, and it's people like your family and everyone you're surrounded by, where even if you're not going in, enlisting, commissioning, doing your thing, it's the overall support. Like, look at what you're doing with WTR, and This Is Why We Stand. It's the support. It's being able to give veterans a platform, and sometimes that's all they need. So I don't necessarily, I'm honored that Dan can call me a mentor, but I think there needs to be more people like that because, listen, I'm a small fish. Regardless of if people are like, you've had so much success, and I call it semi-success. I just have a high ceiling. I think everyone should. But there's so many out there that can do the same thing, and literally 3 principles that I always talk about. But other than that, it's just keep pushing forward. America's the land of opportunity. There's no other place on this earth, on this planet, where you can get out and have the type of success that I've had or that so many veterans have had if it wasn't in America. America has opened the doors to absolutely everyone and anyone that wants to ensure that their future is successful and their future is bright, not only for them but for their family. People who claim otherwise, it's just a flat-out lie. If you just look at a graph and people like to claim, the top... Yes, the top has risen, but guess what? So is the lower class. It's like this. The top can go up steep, and the lower class comes up like this. Every single salary, every wage has still risen. America has always been the land of growth and opportunity. It's just a flat-out lie if they say otherwise. And for veterans, you learned so much from the military that you can take out. Everything you've learned, tactics, techniques, broken down into the 7-step model of leadership, so on and so forth, doing a laundry list of paperwork, I'm losing my train of thought now, but we used to do, operations orders, warning orders, and the operations orders, it's 5-paragraph order, and you do it before every single mission. You can apply everything to everyday life, and it seriously helps. The military sets you up so well. But with you, I don't want to ramble on and off about
it's all good stuff,
all kinds of stuff. But with you, man, like just like I was saying before, and also your military history, you study it, and I believe you're doing a thesis still.
My thesis, the cool thing about my thesis, the grad program I'm in is mainly very sports oriented, but because they know how passionate I am about military history and things, the goal was to connect it to a sports issue. So the reason This Is Why We Stand, I was able to connect the national anthem debate in the NFL to why I believe it's so important to stand and honor that flag. And the best place for me to do that was to go to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, because I think sometimes people don't remember, that the American flag has been carried into battle.
Yep.
Since our founding days, that flag has been carried into battle, and that flag has seen everything. It's meant everything to the men who fought with that flag. And I think, to me, going to Gettysburg was a great place to do that, because it's a perfect prism to talk about all of American history and incorporate that. So I'm still going to send it to you. You're going to be in it, obviously, because you got to have some interviews in there too. But it's a lot of fun, and I think it's one of those things for me where one of the mottos of This Is Why We Stand is duty goes both ways. And to me, you can help, even if you can't personally serve, you could still do your own thing. You could, whether it's keeping history alive, honoring those who've served, doing whatever it takes. You've got a fundraiser coming up here at Trinity Fitness in Rye. There's so many little ways you can give back to those who've served this country. And I think we all have our own talents, we all have our own skills, and we could do those things, use those skills to help those who've served. For me, I knew, the skill I've had is my communications ability. And that's what I've tried to do with the This Is Why We Stand show on Westchester Talk Radio, with my thesis. Even a podcast like this is just another way where being able to do it with you, a vet, and bring other vets on here, it means the world to me. And I think that motto, duty goes both ways, don't forget it.
Right, that's awesome.
I appreciate it.
That's awesome, man. You have some great one-liners.
Well, it's you gotta have some.
Well, yeah.
I don't have too many, so there you go.
Pull them out every now and then.
But I think that's gonna do it for this first episode of Intellectual Combat. Mike we're gonna have a lot of cool stuff still ahead, but this is a blast, and I'm really excited for the future, my friend.
Likewise, and listen, we have some big heavy hitters coming on in the future. Now, I know that this is encompassed in conservatism and military history veterans, but we're going to bring on all walks of life. And our whole concept and our whole model is that we're never going to interject. I'm going to try and bring on also a huge Broadway star, huge famous star. He's one of me and my wife's good friends, and we have incredibly differentiating viewpoints. But he's a great, great dude, and we want to bring on everyone. We want to hear what everyone has to say. I think that really makes for just great radio, great podcasts. There's too much crap out there where people are just one-minded, and they just listen to that. So I'm excited, man.
No, it's going to be awesome. And I mean, you've taken to it so well. You've lined up so many people for us already, and just buckle up and get ready, because there's a lot of good stuff to come. Everyone,
Surprise.
I'm Joe Archino.
And I'm Mike Doody.
Thank you for listening. We'll catch you next time.